I'm happy and proud to be standing here years after I first heard the score to celebrate the man who wrote it.
I know how to make movies. I went to film school. I have a knack for it. I studied it very well and practiced, and I know what I'm doing.
Whatever you do, don't do those artsy, abstract movies. I dare you to do a comedy. I said, for God's sakes, I'm 23 years old. I can do a comedy. I can do anything.
At 81, George Lucas just broke his silence. The man who created Star Wars had been hiding something for decades.
Group of ideas and characters and books and all kinds of things. We could go on making Star Wars for the next 100 years.
In 1962, a car crash nearly killed him. Doctors said he wouldn't make it. But what happened during those 4 months of recovery would change cinema forever. Now, after years of staying quiet, Lucas is revealing the real story.
In the end, they said, well, okay, we'll do this, but you've got to get a big star or a big name connected with it. I said, well, it's a movie about teenagers. I can't get a star connected with it.
The betrayals that almost destroyed him. The secret he kept from his own actors. And the shocking decision that cost him billions. What he's confessing will make you see Star Wars differently. George Lucas was born on May 14, 1944, in Modesto, California. His father owned a stationery store and ran a small walnut ranch. His mother was often in and out of hospitals because of long-term health issues, which left a quiet emptiness in the house. George grew up in a strict Methodist household where hard work and discipline were everything. His father expected him and his siblings to eventually take over the family business. But George was different. In July 1955, when Disneyland opened its gates for the very first time, the Lucas family went. That one visit left a deep impression on young George. The rides, the fantasy, the storytelling, it stirred something inside him that would never settle again. As a kid, George was obsessed with science fiction. He couldn't get enough of shows like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. He read comic books constantly and drew spaceships and aliens in his notebooks. He also devoured adventure books like Robinson Crusoe and Treasure Island. But Flash Gordon was his favorite. He watched the serials religiously after school. That obsession was more than just a pastime. He started building stories in his head, creating strange new worlds and sketching out ideas. Years later, when he wanted to make a Flash Gordon movie but couldn't get the rights, that childhood obsession would turn into something entirely new, Star Wars. But growing up wasn't easy. At Thomas Downey High School in Modesto, George was small, shy, and introverted. He stood just 5'7" as an adult, and during school, he became an easy target for bullies. He felt invisible most of the time, preferring to escape into books, model cars, and old movie serials. He avoided crowds and conflict, but in photography class, something shifted. Behind the camera, George wasn't a target. He was an observer. His teachers started to notice he had an eye for composition and storytelling, even though he still kept to himself. These early struggles shaped the way he thought about characters. He started caring about underdogs, outsiders, and anyone who didn't quite fit in. His school grades were average at best, mostly C's and C minuses. He openly admitted that he daydreamed through most of his classes and didn't care much about school. He loved two things: cars and cameras. He would spend hours after school working on a small yellow Italian car called an Autobianchi Bianchina. It was based on the Fiat 500, and George was completely obsessed with racing it. At the same time, he used his family's 8mm camera to film car races around Modesto. His parents thought it was all a distraction, but it wasn't. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Everything changed on June 12, 1962. Just 3 days before his high school graduation, George was driving home in his modified Bianchina. A classmate named Frank Ferreira was speeding in a large Chevrolet Impala and tried to pass George just as he was turning into his family's driveway. The Chevy slammed into George's tiny car. The Bianchina flipped again and again before crashing into a walnut tree. The wreck was so brutal that the next day, a photo of the mangled car appeared on the front page of the Modesto Bee. Frank, in his larger car, walked away without a scratch, but George's seatbelt snapped. That might have saved his life, because it flung him from the car just moments before it crumpled like paper against the tree. When paramedics arrived, George wasn't breathing. There was no heartbeat. They rushed him to the hospital where he hovered near death. His lungs were crushed. His ribs were broken. He vomited blood, and his skin turned blue. For 2 weeks, he was in intensive care, barely holding on. The doctors thought he wouldn't make it, but somehow he did. Later, George said that the accident made him realize how thin the line between life and death really is. That crash changed his thinking completely. He said, "I decided I was going to make something out of my life." During the 4 long months he spent recovering, George couldn't do any of the physical things he loved. So he started reading. He devoured books on mythology, philosophy, and anthropology. He went from being a poor student to someone deeply curious about the world. He reflected on his life and future. That time in bed gave him a new purpose. He also began struggling with survivor's guilt. He kept wondering why he lived. That question would follow him for years and become a part of the deeper themes in his stories: purpose, destiny, and the quiet journey of a hero. When he got better, George enrolled in Modesto Junior College. He studied psychology and philosophy, the subjects he once ignored. His grades improved. He took his first film class. And while he no longer raced cars, he still took photos of car races from the sidelines. Through this safer pursuit, he met cinematographer Haskell Wexler, a fellow racing enthusiast. Wexler saw something in George. He encouraged him to apply to USC's School of Cinematic Arts. In 1965, George earned his associate degree and transferred to USC. It was the end of his racing dream, but the beginning of everything else. At USC, George was all in. He completed 2 years of undergraduate courses in just 1 year. He was 21 when he joined the program. He became close friends with other future filmmakers like Walter Murch, John Milius, and Caleb Deschanel. They were later called the Dirty Dozen.
You will find that if you go to Hollywood. I hope you don't, because you don't want to be oppressed by people who are not as smart as you are.
One professor who deeply influenced him was Lester Novros, who taught about color, light, and movement, rather than just storytelling. Another mentor was Slavko Vorkapich, who taught him how montage could manipulate time and emotion. These lessons would shape Lucas's signature cinematic style. In 1967, George created a short film called Electronic Labyrinth, THX 1138 4EB. It was a 15-minute dystopian film about a man escaping a surveillance state. What shocked people was how advanced it looked and sounded for a student film. Lucas had found a clever way to get free access to expensive resources. He volunteered to teach an unwanted Navy class at USC, which gave him unlimited color film and lab processing. The Navy men became his crew and cast. He filmed at real-world locations like LAX and UCLA at night. The final product earned him the Samuel Warner Memorial Scholarship and a 6-month internship at Warner Brothers. Years later, the Library of Congress preserved it in the National Film Registry. At USC, Lucas didn't just work hard, he barely slept. He spent 18 hours a day editing film, often experimenting late into the night. He formed a small group called the Clean Cut Cinema Club with Don Glut and Chris Lewis. They created a company called Sunrise Productions. Lucas even used the name Lucas Beaumont for a time. Their biggest project was a film that never got finished called 543. It was meant to be a fake documentary about a fake beach movie called Orgy Beach Party. It was strange, creative, and ahead of its time. These were the years when George also became close to Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese. Right after college, something unexpected happened. Lucas was drafted for the Vietnam War. He was 23, but during the medical checkup, doctors found that he had type 2 diabetes, inherited from his grandfather. Combined with his earlier lung injuries from the car crash, he was labeled 4F, which meant he was medically unfit to serve. That rejection left a deep mark on him. It made him think critically about war and power. He became deeply skeptical of governments and authority figures. He had once wanted to make a student film about a soldier fighting a plane. That idea later evolved into Apocalypse Now through talks with Francis Ford Coppola. His brush with war, though indirect, helped shape the rebellion themes in Star Wars and THX 1138. But before Star Wars ever reached a movie screen, George Lucas nearly lost everything. It started with a film called THX 1138. He made it with just $777,000. It was strange, cold, and artistic. But when it hit theaters, audiences stayed away. It only made $2.4 million. That failure was crushing. Lucas had to personally return his advance to Warner Brothers. The pressure was so heavy, it nearly ended his directing career before it even started. He realized something painful. If he wanted to survive, he couldn't just make films for himself. He had to think about what people wanted to watch. That failure, bitter, humiliating, and expensive, quietly became the reason Star Wars ever existed. It taught him the brutal truth about Hollywood. If THX 1138 had been a hit, Lucas might have spent the rest of his life making obscure art films. But the pain changed him.
I realized at some point I needed to retire, and I wanted to go on and do other things, things in philanthropy. And
What made it worse was the betrayal. Warner Brothers didn't just pull back funding. They humiliated him. They forced Coppola to return his advance. They killed 6 more films his company was planning. And without warning, they took 5 minutes out of THX 1138 without asking Lucas. He had final cut rights, but they ignored that. Furious, Lucas and his team stole a copy of the film from Warner's lot to stop them from making more changes. Lucas later said, "There was no point for them to do it other than to exercise some power." He felt used. That experience left a scar that shaped his future obsession with keeping control. He never forgot what it felt like to lose his voice. The damage didn't stop there. American Zoetrope, the company Lucas had helped build, was a financial disaster waiting to happen. By 1990, it was buried under $28.8 million in debt, with only $22.1 million in assets. Coppola alone owed $3 million to Darion Development. Another $16.2 million was owed to Hot Weather Films and $6.2 million to Orion Pictures. Even back in 1983, its sister studio had gone bankrupt. Lucas had already backed away, watching from a safe distance. He had learned after THX 1138 that he had to protect himself. He saw what happened when filmmakers chased dreams without financial plans. But then everything changed with a movie no one expected. American Graffiti came out in 1973. It was made for just $775,000. It made $115 million. That's nearly a 15,000% return. Suddenly, the kid who'd failed with THX had a hit that topped the summer box office. It even crushed big films like Live and Let Die, which made $35.4 million. He cast unknowns. Harrison Ford only had a small role. Paul Le Mat won a Golden Globe. Universal never believed it would work, but it worked so well that Lucas was finally free. He got his first Oscar nominations. More importantly, he got the freedom to try again. This time, he wanted to go to space. In 1973, Lucas began drafting Star Wars, but his first version was embarrassing. He called it Journal of the Wills. It stole lines from Edgar Rice Burroughs' 1931 novel, A Fighting Man of Mars. Even worse, Lucas copied parts of Donald Ritchie's book on Akira Kurosawa. If anyone had found out, it could have ended him. But instead of quitting, Lucas kept rewriting. For 3 years, every day for 8 hours, he worked. He slowly turned stolen pulp into something original. He discovered Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces. It became his guide. He didn't give up. He turned shame into myth.
Disney said, gee, or Bob Iger said, gee, if you really want to sell your company, if you're thinking about selling it, because we were talking about retirement and what are you going to do after all this kind of stuff.
Then came the deal that changed history. In 1975, 20th Century Fox gave him a contract for Star Wars. They didn't believe in it. They thought it was a vanity project. Lucas offered to slash his salary from $500,000 to $150,000 in return for all sequel and merchandising rights. They laughed and agreed. They thought toys were worthless. But that single decision cost Fox billions. By 2014, the Star Wars franchise was worth $37 billion. Just the toys made $5 billion a year by 2016. Lucas had tried to sell the toy rights to multiple companies. Only Kenner said yes, for just $100,000 and a 5% cut per toy. That mistake made Lucas a billionaire, and he never forgot it.
Know the legacy that's out there, but I have to just do my job every day and work. It doesn't make writing any easier, I'll tell you.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't even make directing that much easier.
But making Star Wars wasn't magic. It was a nightmare. Filming began in Tunisia on March 22, 1976. On day 2, the desert had its first winter rain in 50 years. Filming stopped. Crew members got dysentery. Creature designer Stuart Freeborn got pneumonia and had to be hospitalized in London. R2-D2's motors failed. C-3PO's costume broke and cut Anthony Daniels' foot. Props didn't work. When they moved to Elstree Studios in London on April 7th, the British crew mocked the film. They called it a kid's cartoon. They refused to work past 5:30 p.m. unless they got overtime. Kenny Baker, the man inside R2-D2, later admitted he thought it was going to be a flop. Everyone treated it like a joke. Lucas felt alone. The effects were worse. Lucas had built a company called Industrial Light and Magic because no one else could do what he wanted. But when he visited ILM during post-production, they had only finished 7 shots. He said only 1 was usable. The cost? Over $1 million on a film with just an $11 million budget. Lucas was furious. The team was slow, relaxed. Dykstra, the supervisor, couldn't control it. Lucas stepped in. He fired his editor. He worked weekends. He cut scenes himself. He did whatever it took. Without him, Star Wars would have looked like a joke. He saved it by bleeding for it. The pressure nearly killed him. Lucas was 28. He had just fought with Dykstra again when he felt sharp pain in his chest. He thought he was having a heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital. It turned out to be extreme stress and hypertension. The doctors told him to stop or risk his life. On set, even Harrison Ford mocked the dialogue. Lucas thought the movie would flop. He was exhausted. He decided right then that he would never direct a Star Wars sequel. He couldn't go through it again. But he kept going just long enough. The film made $775 million. It changed everything. And when the sequel came, Lucas did something shocking. He kept the biggest secret in movie history. He decided Darth Vader would be Luke's father. But only he and Mark Hamill knew. The script said something else. Obi-Wan killed your father. Even the actor inside Vader didn't know. David Prowse spoke fake lines. James Earl Jones recorded the real one later. Lucas kept the truth locked tight. When the film released on May 21, 1980, the world gasped. It was the greatest twist in cinema. and no one had seen it coming. But behind the scenes, Lucas was risking everything again. He paid for The Empire Strikes Back with his own money. He got an $18 million loan. If it failed, he was ruined. Costs went up. Stress went up. His relationship with producer Gary Kurtz cracked. Kurtz said everyone was affected by the pressure. But Lucas didn't give up control. The movie made $538 million. The risk paid off, and Lucas kept the rights to everything. Then came disaster. Just before filming, a fire destroyed Stage 3 at Elstree Studios. Fire trucks couldn't get there fast because the roads were blocked. Everything burned. Sets were lost. Filming was delayed by 3 months. Stanley Kubrick, who was filming The Shining nearby, used the fire as an excuse to claim more space. Lucas's team was furious. Producer Gary Kurtz said it was the hardest part of the movie. Rebuilding 64 sets wasn't just expensive, it nearly broke them. That production destroyed Lucas's friendship with Kurtz. They had worked together for 10 years. Kurtz had produced American Graffiti and the first Star Wars. But by Empire, Lucas had turned Lucasfilm into a massive company. He started hiring outsiders. He focused on toys. Kurtz hated that. He wanted the story to matter. Lucas blamed Kurtz for every delay. They stopped talking. Whether Kurtz quit or was fired, they never worked together again. With the money from Star Wars, Lucas built a fortress. In 1978, he bought land for what would become Skywalker Ranch. It covered 4,700 acres. He spent $100 million building it. It had its own fire station, a lake he named after Ewoks, a private theater called the Stag, and even vineyards. But most of the land was left wild. It was more than a studio. It was Lucas's escape. It was so private that even President Reagan wasn't allowed to tour it. Lucas wanted peace. He had earned it. Then he teamed up with Spielberg. Together, they made Raiders of the Lost Ark. They wanted everything to feel real. On May 27, 1980, they met with ILM to plan stunts and effects. They chose danger over safety. People got hurt, but Lucas and Spielberg didn't stop. They believed in practical effects. The opening scene of Raiders was brutal to film, but it became iconic. They were chasing truth, even if it cost pain. In 1984, George Lucas released a film that would accidentally change Hollywood forever. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom shocked audiences with scenes that were too much for a PG rating. People watched in horror as a man's heart was ripped from his chest while still beating, children were whipped like slaves, and a human sacrifice ended with a man burning alive. Parents were furious. They had taken their kids expecting another fun adventure like Raiders of the Lost Ark. But instead, they got nightmare fuel. Lucas later admitted that both he and Steven Spielberg were going through dark times. George was in the middle of a divorce. Steven had just broken up with his girlfriend. Their pain leaked into the film. The outcry was so loud that it forced Hollywood to create a new rating category. Just 2 months after the film's release in June 1984, the PG-13 rating was born. The first movies to get it were Red Dawn and The Woman in Red, and it all started because of Lucas's heartbreak. Just 1 year earlier, in 1983, Lucas's personal life had collapsed. On June 16th, the Modesto Bee reported that George and his wife Marcia were divorcing. Marcia wasn't just his wife. She was also an Oscar-winning editor and a key force behind Star Wars. She had edited the original film and helped shape its emotional power. She was the heart of Lucasfilm, throwing parties and holding the team together while George focused only on work. When they split, Marcia received between $35 and $50 million in cash. That was more than the budget of a Star Wars movie at the time. Lucas had just released Return of the Jedi, and Star Wars merchandise sales were starting to fall. Losing his wife, his partner, and half his fortune at once left him shattered. He had promised to take a break, to spend time with her and their daughter, but he never stopped working. And that mistake would cost him everything. To survive financially, Lucas started selling off parts of his company. One of those divisions was a small group of computer graphics experts who had been quietly working since 1979. In February 1986, George spun them off as their own company. He wasn't being visionary, he was desperate. Steve Jobs bought the team for only $5 million and added another $5 million of his own money to keep it running. That team became Pixar. At first, it was a disaster. Their hardware, the Pixar image computer, barely sold. The edit-to-droid system also failed, with only 24 units ever made. Jobs had to pour $50 million of his own money just to keep Pixar alive. But the company slowly shifted to animation. And what Lucas saw as a failed project would go on to become one of the most successful entertainment companies in the world. He had given it up just to stay afloat. When Lucas returned to Indiana Jones in 1989 for The Last Crusade, things didn't go smoothly either. Sean Connery played Indiana's father, which brought Lucas's own father issues into the story. But filming was dangerous. In one scene, a plane gets damaged mid-air by accident, and that scene had to be reshot over and over due to technical mistakes. The tank chase nearly killed stuntmen multiple times. Harrison Ford was actually hanging off a moving tank cannon. New digital effects created even more problems. The moment when Donovan rapidly ages and turns to dust was the first fully digital composite scene in a movie. It took 3 months just to finish those few seconds. In another part, a stuntman had to fall 30 feet through a floor, surrounded by moving blades. It was terrifying. But the film worked. It was a huge success. Still, Lucas was tired. After that, he wouldn't do hands-on filmmaking for more than 10 years. Back in the 1980s, Lucas had also tried to change how films were edited. He built something called Edit Droid through a company called DroidWorks. It was a digital editing system with a timeline and a wide screen, years ahead of Final Cut Pro or Avid. It first appeared in 1984, but no one was ready. Only 24 units were made. DroidWorks shut down in 1987, but Lucas didn't forget. In 1993, Avid bought the software, and suddenly everyone wanted non-linear digital editing. Lucas began suing companies that copied his system. His legal battles set the rules for how editing patents would work in Hollywood for decades, even though his own invention had failed. Then came May 19, 1999. The Phantom Menace hit theaters. Fans were excited. But within days, all the excitement turned into rage. One character became the focus of all that hate: Jar Jar Binks. People said he was a racist stereotype, like something from an old minstrel show. Actor Ahmed Best received more than 10,000 hate emails every day. At a fan convention in 2000, he was confronted by people screaming racial slurs. In 2018, he admitted that in 1999, he had stood on the edge of the Brooklyn Bridge thinking about ending his life. He had been a rising star, performing with Stomp, and suddenly he was unemployed. Lucas never contacted him. Over 50,000 online posts trashed Jar Jar in the first month alone. The character appeared in 3 movies, with a total of 65 minutes of screen time, and became the most hated figure in modern film history. Lucas made things worse by deciding to direct all 3 prequels himself. He hadn't directed a film in 16 years. Steven Spielberg and Ron Howard begged him to let someone else do it. He refused. For Attack of the Clones in 2002, Lucas used digital cameras costing $150,000 each. It was the first big film shot completely without film, but instead of success, it became a warning. The movie had 2,200 digital effects shots, while the entire original trilogy had only 594 combined. Critics slammed the stiff dialogue. Natalie Portman later said she struggled every day with the lines. The love scenes between Anakin and Padme took 47 takes each. Lucas didn't know how to guide the actors. Between 1999 and 2002, box office numbers dropped by 35%. Lucas spent 14 hours a day in the editing room for 2 years straight, isolated and exhausted. He rewrote scenes during post-production, leading to $40 million in reshoots. On Revenge of the Sith in 2004, he hid major plot points from the actors until the last minute. Hayden Christensen didn't know he was going to kill children until 3 hours before filming. Samuel L. Jackson learned about his death from a call sheet. Tensions ran high. The famous "no" scene took 18 takes because Lucas couldn't explain the emotion he wanted. Ewan McGregor got so tired of acting with tennis balls on green screens that he started complaining publicly. Lucas kept changing the lightsaber fights daily. Christensen ended up with back injuries. The 116-day shoot dragged on to 156 days. The cast started calling Lucas the Hermit. Several asked for changes to the script. Lucas said no. Even though the prequels made $2.5 billion at the box office, fans revolted like never before. More than 350,000 people signed petitions asking for remakes. One petition hit 380,000 signatures by 2012. Fans raised $200,000 just to run anti-prequel ads in The Hollywood Reporter. In 2005, Lucas received death threats that had to be investigated by the FBI. From 2005 to 2008, Star Wars merchandise sales dropped by 60%. Lucas told Charlie Rose that he felt trapped in a beautiful prison. Between 2005 and 2012, he spent $600,000 on therapy. He developed chronic insomnia and had to use sleeping pills for 7 years. By 2014, he compared the prequel experience to the Vietnam War and said he should have handed control to someone else after Return of the Jedi. After his 1983 divorce, George became a single father. He adopted 3 children, Amanda in 1981, Katie in 1988, and Jet in 1993. But behind the gates of Skywalker Ranch, things got darker. The 4,700-acre estate became his cage. Lucas would go days without seeing another human. His routine was brutal. Up at 4 a.m., working until midnight, surviving on protein bars and coffee. By 2003, he had lost 35 pounds and looked ghostly. His assistant Jane Bay quit in 2004, worried about his mental health. He spent $2 million on security, convinced that fans were hunting him. Between 2000 and 2006, he took antidepressants. He even built a private theater where he would watch his original trilogy alone. Sometimes he cried. His children later said they barely saw him during the prequel years.
Group of ideas and characters and books and all kinds of things. We could go on making Star Wars for the next 100 years.
Everything changed in May 2011. Over breakfast with Disney CEO Bob Iger, Lucas decided to sell everything. He had just turned 67. On October 30th, 2012, the deal was made public. Disney bought Lucasfilm for $4.05 billion, half in cash, half in Disney stock. The deal included Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and Lucas's visual effects and audio divisions. Kathleen Kennedy was named president. Lucas stepped back. He became a creative consultant, but not much more. The sale made him one of the richest filmmakers in history. In 2015, Lucas gave a shocking interview to Charlie Rose. He called Disney white slavers and said he had given them detailed story ideas for the sequels, which they completely ignored. He had wanted to tell a story. They wanted to make something for the fans. "These were my kids," he said. "I loved them. I created them. I sold them." He later apologized for the white slavers comment, but the damage was done. He knew if he stayed involved, he would just cause problems. In 2025, something unbelievable happened. At 81 years old, George Lucas finally showed up at Comic-Con. for the first time ever. But he wasn't there to talk about Star Wars. He came to show off something else, his lifelong passion. The Lucas Museum of Narrative Art, set to open in 2026 in Los Angeles. He revealed that he had spent 50 years collecting art. His collection was now worth over $1 billion. It would become the heart of a 300,000 square foot museum with 2 theaters, galleries, and exhibits from names like Norman Rockwell. He called it a temple to the people's art, not about money, but about emotion.